6 things to watch at this mini camp. I'll give you 3 of them, and then I'll give you 3 more. Does everyone show up? Odell Beckham Jr.'s movement and the linebacking pecking order. So let's go through those.
Yeah, so everybody's showing up. Obviously, I think that's going to be the big one because, you mentioned it too with the voluntary mini camps. Browns didn't have the best showing compared to other teams. The Texans and 49ers were just a couple of teams that, canceled their mandatory mini camps because of how good their showings were in voluntary mini camps earlier in the offseason. So because of that, they didn't feel like they had to do the mandatory mini camps. So, for the Browns, I think that it's going to be interesting to see if everybody shows up. And 2, you mentioned Odell and his movement. If he's able to move well, I think that could be an absolute game changer because, like we talked about before, Odell and Baker, this is the first offseason activity that they've actually had, period, since Odell came to Cleveland. So I think that that's massive for them. The more reps that they're able to get and not have to worry about getting chemistry during the actual season, during in-game action, the better for these two. And then, third, I think that overall for the Browns, what I'm looking for with these guys is really just how they're able to handle everything and how they're able to kind of put things together. Overall, I think that this team can do a lot. And I think that they can go ahead and show a lot for what they've been able to do. And especially, too, we talked about one of the big questions from last year, the linebackers. And that linebacking pecking order, I know that you mentioned that. And you have Mack Wilson, who is somebody who, made some plays, but also can be inconsistent. You have Jacob Phillips, who was a high draft pick last year in the 3rd round. And he was somebody who, was very impressive. And I know the front office likes him quite a bit. So combining that with some of the veterans, Malcolm Smith, you obviously add in Anthony Walker, a good leadership player. And on top of that, too, you obviously drafted JOK, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, and he looks the part. Obviously, there's no pads on quite yet, but, I'm not going to fault the guy for looking absolutely shredded on the field. So, I think that how they're able to, establish their pecking order with those guys is going to be fantastic because I think that with Joe Woods, he's going to add in a lot more versatility to this defensive line or to the linebacker room, and, utilizing certain players. I think that that's going to be huge and go a long way, especially.
So the other 3, day 3 rookies, so the guys that were drafted later in the draft, the status of the 2020 opt-outs, the guys who chose not to play because of COVID, and the crowd at wide receiver. Let's go through those.
Okay, so for the day 3 rookies, I think that it's a little bit of expectations in managing those for a couple of those guys. So James Hudson, obviously, he's going to be a developmental guy this year. Backup offensive tackle, we talked about him a little bit earlier. But, for some of the guys on defense, I think that, these are guys who are going to be special teamers. Now, you lost some of those special teamers from last year, and Tavir Thomas being one, and, a few others as well. But in order to replace some of those guys, you have a Richie LeCount who was selected in round 5. And he's somebody who can make plays on defense, but he's also not afraid to hit in special teams. Same thing goes for Tony Fields. Now, he had an injury earlier in the offseason. If he's able to recover back in time, that's great. If not, I'll be interested to see how he's able to, play in training camp. But the player that I'm actually really interested to see how he ends up playing is Demetric Felton, the running back / wide receiver. Now, he worked out a little bit at wide receiver down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl, and, his route running looks phenomenal. But I think he's somebody who, he can be a kick returner, I think, on day 1. It might not necessarily be a role on the offense per se or a massive role, but I do think that he's somebody who can challenge that Dearness Johnson type of role where he can be that, change of pace back for these guys. And he can be somebody who can return kicks. So I'm interested to see how he's able to play. And then Tommy Togiai was selected in round 4. And he's somebody who, he was starting to develop, this past year with Ohio State. I think he's going to be that nose tackle backup as well. So I think he's somebody who I'm keeping an eye on. And then for the opt-outs, I know that you had mentioned, Andrew Billings is somebody who hasn't gotten a lot of talk this offseason. I was fascinated by his signing last year, and I do think the Browns severely missed him last year because Larry Ogunjobi, and I love Larry. I love what he's able to do and the way he's able to play. However, I just didn't think that for a nose tackle, he had enough of that bulk that you need to take up 2 of those blockers. And Andrew Billings can do that and then some for those guys. So he's somebody who I think can fill those holes on those first couple of downs. And then at that point, it's all out. Now, you had also mentioned the wide receiver room. And that's a group that I'm really intrigued to see, because obviously we talked about Jarvis and Odell, but, those latter guys, obviously Kadril Hodge, he was somebody who bursted onto the scene last year and really showed a lot of chemistry with Baker. And on top of that, too, you add in some of these guys on the back end of the receiver room. And I do think that there are guys who can make an impact and who will make an impact in the NFL. I'm just not sure if they're going to be able to make it on this team because of how crowded it is. And I haven't even mentioned Donovan Peoples-Jones at this point. So, these guys, it's a crowded receiver room, but I'm going to be interested to see who's able to stand out of these guys.
Yeah, and another guy that opted out to keep an ear out for is Drew Forbes, offensive tackle. Could add some depth.
Good one.
Could add some depth to that offensive line that the Browns are looking for.